What would the world look like if the internet, something meant for satellites, fiber optics, and global electricity networks, had been invented almost 3,000 years too early? What if the Bronze Age, a time defined by kings, chariots, and copper-smelting workshops, suddenly gained the power to communicate across continents at the speed of thought? And what if this one impossible leap reshaped every era that followed, including the events everyone knows today? Before diving into this impossible timeline, here's what this full journey will explore: how a Bronze Age network reshapes ancient empires, transforms the Iron Age, influences Rome's rise, alters medieval power, rewrites the Renaissance, reshapes the Industrial Revolution, disrupts world wars, redirects the digital era, and finally changes the world we live in today. Lean back and enjoy. In the late Bronze Age, around 1800 BCE, ancient kingdoms across Mesopotamia and the eastern Mediterranean were locked in a delicate balance of trade and rivalry. The Hittite Empire, Babylon, and Egyptian dynasties flourished through vast networks of merchants, caravans, and scribes. Among these scribes lived a young Anatolian mathematician named Hur, known for constructing elaborate clay tablets filled with diagrams of stars, weather patterns, and crude electrical symbols, long before such concepts were understood. His fascination came from the rare but natural electrical phenomena: lightning storms, charged minerals, and fish capable of producing shocks in the Nile and Tigris. One day, while experimenting with copper plates, vine-soaked cords, and magnetized stones, Hur discovered something extraordinary: a repeating signal transmitted through a thin wire coil, forming stable pulses that could travel through connected metal lines. It wasn't electricity as modern science defines it, but it functioned like a primitive electromagnetic wave. His brilliance wasn't in understanding the physics, but in recognizing patterns within the pulses and encoding them into symbols. After months of obsessively refining the device with a group of artisans, the first proto-network node emerged: the Lumenstone relay, capable of transmitting encoded pulses over long metal lines and amplifying them using heated bronze coils. Kingdoms initially dismissed the invention as a toy until Hur linked two distant Hittite outposts and allowed commanders to exchange messages in seconds. This single proof of concept spread through the courts like wildfire. The Hittite king, Suppiluliuma II, immediately saw military potential. He ordered networks stretched along trade roads and military routes, forming the earliest internet-like communication grid in human history. Though primitive and unstable, it allowed something never seen before: instantaneous strategic updates, rapid coordination of armies, and unparalleled control over vassal states. As news of the lightning pathways spread, Egypt responded by forming its own relay system. Centered around Memphis and Thebes, Pharaoh Ramesses III commissioned priests, overseers, and foreign artisans to improve the network. Within months, the Egyptian version surpassed the Hittite one, integrating hieroglyphic code streams that functioned like early digital language. Trade transformed overnight. Merchants could send price updates, route warnings, and weather alerts. Kingdoms grew richer. Diplomats became obsolete, but stability was an illusion. For the first time in history, information became a weapon, and the kingdom that mastered this new power would dominate the world. The invention hit its first massive turning point during one of the most famous events of the age: the Bronze Age collapse, a historic, mysterious systemic fall around 1200 BCE. But in this altered timeline, its causes unfolded differently. The Sea Peoples, a coalition of migrating warriors and raiders, attempted to strike the coasts of Egypt and Anatolia as in real history. But this time, coast watchers used a lightning pathway to send instant alerts across hundreds of kilometers. Armies mobilized far faster than in the original timeline. The Hittites resisted early raids successfully, avoiding the sudden devastation that historically destroyed their capital, Hattusa. Egypt, warned days in advance, organized defensive formations along the Nile Delta. Instead of collapse, the Bronze Age, superpowers entered a new era of hyper-coordinated warfare. The Sea Peoples were defeated, not scattered across history. This stabilization kept the ancient world intact far longer. The trade networks continued thriving, allowing rare materials, tin, copper, gemstones to flow without the historical interruptions. As metalworkers exchanged techniques through the lightning pathway, the new trend emerged: collaborative innovation across cultures. For the first time in human history, knowledge traveled faster than armies or caravans. Artisans in Babylon learned Egyptian casting techniques in days instead of years. Shipbuilders in Crete adapted Hittite hull designs. Even small kingdoms like Kugerit and Byblos gained power by becoming communication hubs. But alongside this burst of prosperity came its shadow. The more kingdoms relied on the network, the more political tension grew. Controlling a relay node meant controlling information itself, and therefore power. Kings hired specialized pulse priests, trained to monitor, filter, and even manipulate signals that passed through their lands. Eras-Her's invention became the foundation of ancient espionage. Fake signals, code forgeries, early cyber attacks, primitive but effective, disrupted enemy supply lines. A new world was emerging, one where wars were fought not only with chariots, but with information streams. The most dramatic consequence came when the Hittite king attempted to monopolize the network by seizing Egyptian relay routes. Instead of sparking a traditional war, Egypt triggered a coordinated shutdown of its nodes, plunging Hittite communication into chaos. For the first time, kingdoms realized the fragility of a civilization dependent on connected technology. And through all of this, Eras-Her, now older, respected yet deeply conflicted, questioned whether humanity was ready for the power he unleashed. His surviving clay tablet writings, preserved in this alternate timeline, describe his fear. A kingdom that speaks too fast thinks too little. Despite his concerns, his system grew more advanced, shaped by hundreds of engineers across continents. Copper lines stretched through valleys and across deserts. Relay towers flickered with encoded bronze heat coils, and the world stood on the verge of something unprecedented, an ancient information age.
As Part 1 closes, the stage is set for the next era. The Iron Age approaches, armed with decades of connected knowledge and supercharged cultural exchange. The world is about to form the first global digital culture, thousands of years ahead of schedule, laying foundations that will ripple into the rise of empires, the shaping of religions, and historical events no one could have foreseen.
As the Bronze Age stabilized rather than collapsed, ancient civilizations entered a new era shaped by strengthened knowledge networks and an unprecedented level of shared innovation. By the time iron smelting began spreading across Anatolia, the Middle East, and the Mediterranean, the lightning pathway had already rewired how cultures exchanged information. This new interconnected world accelerated the shift from bronze to iron, turning what was once a slow process of experimentation into a rapid, collaborative transformation. In this reimagined timeline, the Iron Age did not emerge unevenly or sporadically. Instead, it rose as a coordinated technological revolution. The Hittites, Egyptians, Cypriots, and Assyrians all contributed their best metallurgists through encoded exchanges, sending diagrams, heat instructions, and furnace designs over the signal network. Within a single generation, smiths in lands that had never mastered bronze alloying were already producing standardized iron tools, weapons, and agricultural equipment. At the center of this transformation was the aging scholar Eros Hur, whose inventions had long outgrown his original understanding. Now in his later years, he served as a philosophical advisor to a council of engineers formed between Egypt, the Levant, and Anatolia. The group's goal was to refine the network's infrastructure, replacing fragile copper lines with stronger iron-based conduits capable of carrying signals farther and more reliably. This project birthed the Iron Web, the world's first large-scale, semi-industrial communication grid. Relay towers grew taller, reinforced with iron frames, and integrated heat-powered converters that improved signal clarity. For the first time, messages could travel from Thebes to Babylon, or from Hattusa to Crete, through hundreds of nodes without manual reamplification. But with increased reach came increased consequence. Kingdoms no longer acted in isolation. Local conflicts instantly escalated into regional standoffs. Trade disputes broadcast across nodes caused political ripples in distant cities. Leaders began using the Iron Web to influence populations, directly sending coded public announcements, religious proclamations, and even propaganda across their controlled networks. The Assyrian Empire was among the first to exploit this power fully. Under King Ashur-Shishi II, they developed a specialized military corps, known as the Signal Warriors, trained not only in combat but in intercepting, decoding, and corrupting enemy transmissions. They mastered signal isolation, a technique where rival kingdoms' relay lines were intentionally overheated or saturated with false pulses to cut off communication. These tactics gave Assyria a massive advantage during its early expansion campaigns. One of the most famous historical events altered by this technology was the Battle of Karkar in 1853 BCE. In real history, a coalition of Levantine states halted the advance of King Shalmaneser III. But in this alternate timeline, both sides entered the battle armed with network intelligence. Coalition leaders used real-time updates to reposition troops with unprecedented speed, while Assyrian commanders deployed counter-signals to mask their cavalry movements. Although the coalition still managed to stop the Assyrian advance, neither side achieved decisive victory. Instead, the battle marked the birth of an ancient doctrine. Control the signal, control the battlefield. Generations of generals would base their strategies on this principle. Beyond warfare, the Iron Web reshaped culture at an astonishing rate. Knowledge that once required centuries to migrate across continents now spread within weeks. Phoenician traders used the network to standardize shipping schedules and navigation routes. Their alphabet, already simple and adaptive, became widely taught through encoded tutorials passed through the network. As a result, literacy expanded at a pace unknown in our real timeline. This widespread literacy triggered something extraordinary: the creation of the first open library, established in Byblos.
It served as the earliest communal knowledge platform, where scribes uploaded, summarized scrolls into organized code sequences, accessible across the Iron Web. Though limited and symbolic, it functioned like a primitive online archive centuries before libraries such as Alexandria emerged. Beyond warfare, the Iron Web reshaped culture at an astonishing rate. Knowledge that once required centuries to migrate across continents now spread within weeks. Phoenician traders used the network to standardize shipping schedules and navigation routes. Their alphabet, already simple and adaptive, became widely taught through encoded tutorials passed through the network.
As a result, literacy expanded at a pace unknown in our real timeline. This widespread literacy triggered something extraordinary: the creation of the first open library, established in Byblos.
It served as the earliest communal knowledge platform, where scribes uploaded, summarized scrolls into organized code sequences, accessible across the Iron Web. Though limited and symbolic, it functioned like a primitive online archive centuries before libraries such as Alexandria emerged. Religion evolved too. Priests from different regions exchanged theological interpretations and ritual practices through coded transmissions, causing belief systems to merge, overlap, or clash. The spread of ideas no longer depended on missionaries or conquest. It flowed through copper and iron like water. Erasher, now regarded as a legendary thinker, observed these shifts with both pride and unease. He feared that kingdoms valued influence more than understanding. His final apprentice, a brilliant young Babylonian named Namus Enlil, took these concerns seriously. Namus saw the rise of political manipulation, coded misinformation, and social division, and believed the network needed regulation. His proposals to limit signal tampering were dismissed by kings hungry for advantage. As iron infrastructure expanded westward into Greece and Italy, new cultures gained access to shared knowledge. Early Greek philosophers debated mathematical principles transmitted from Babylonian scholars. Proto-Roman settlements received architectural insights from Anatolian engineers, allowing them to organize city structures far earlier than in real history. The Mediterranean was no longer a collection of isolated cultures. It was becoming a synchronized web of accelerated development. But the Iron Web carried a flaw. Its entire system depended on heated relay nodes, vulnerable to overuse, sabotage, and natural disasters. When an unusually powerful earthquake struck the Levant, several major nodes collapsed simultaneously, triggering an unprecedented information blackout. Trade halted. Armies became directionless. Rumors spread faster than verified signals. The collapse revealed the world's dependence on constant connectivity, and how civilizations had built their stability on fragile metal lines. As workers scrambled to restore the network, tensions rose between Egypt, Assyria, and Babylon over responsibility and sabotage accusations. The restoration took years, but once completed, the leaders agreed to form the Council of Nine Nodes, the first international regulatory body overseeing the Iron Web's maintenance and safety standards. This act, rare for ancient kingdoms, would shape diplomacy in profound ways.
laying the groundwork for unprecedented cooperation across rival empires. Yet even as order was restored, Namis Enlil warned that a much greater storm was coming. Iron had pushed humanity forward, but soon, a new civilization in the Mediterranean would rise and weaponize the network like nothing before. The world was moving toward the Age of Rome, where strategy, bureaucracy, and imperial ambition would collide with the ancient internet in ways that would transform history forever. Part 2 ends as the Iron Age's foundations solidify, setting the stage for the emergence of a unified empire ready to harness information on a scale no civilization had ever attempted. What if the quest for new worlds didn't just reshape maps, but rewired the trajectory of human obsession itself? This chapter dives into the explosive era of maritime discovery, an age defined by ambition, fear, radical curiosity, and the hunger for expansion. Building on the agricultural dawn of humanity and the classical era of power struggles, this part explores how the human need to push beyond the horizon became the engine that drove the modern world. The middle of the 15th century marked a decisive turning point in global history. While earlier civilizations had already explored regional seas, the Age of Discovery pushed humanity into a completely new mental framework. Monarchs, merchants, scientists, religious leaders, and ambitious outsiders all converged on a single idea. The world was far larger than anyone understood, and whoever reached its unknown edges first would define the future. This mindset produced not just voyages, but a transformation of how entire societies perceived risk, opportunity, and destiny. Across Europe, new technologies accelerated this shift. The magnetic compass, refined nautical charts, lateen sails, and improved hull designs made longer oceanic journeys possible. These innovations allowed individuals like João Afonso, a Portuguese navigator, to embark on expeditions that would have been suicidal only a century earlier. Afonso became a historical example of how technical advancement and personal ambition fused into a relentless drive to discover what lay beyond familiar shorelines. Yet these explorers were not purely adventurers. They were instruments of geopolitical hunger. Portuguese royal strategy revolved around seizing control of the lucrative spice trade. For centuries, spices like cinnamon, clove, nutmeg, and pepper had flowed along the Silk Road into Mediterranean markets. By cutting out middlemen, Portugal aimed to redirect unimaginable wealth into its own ports. Knowledge was treated like treasure, with each new coastal landmark becoming a proprietary secret. Sailors were sworn into silence, and navigational data was classified as state property. This intense secrecy created a competitive ecosystem where exploration became warfare through information. Meanwhile, Spain forged its own path after the Reconquista, with Christian monarchs seeking to secure their legacy. Funding overseas expeditions became an expression of national destiny. Christopher Columbus's westward venture was only one example of this mindset, an experiment driven more by desperation than certainty. His miscalculations, though massive, opened an avenue for Spain to construct a massive overseas empire. This outcome demonstrated a brutal but consistent truth about the Age of Discovery. Success did not always favor accuracy, but audacity. As European expeditions intensified, human encounters shaped the moral tensions of the era. The character of Yara, an indigenous leader from the Caribbean, represents the perspective often overshadowed in traditional history. Yara observed unfamiliar ships approaching her shores, carrying men driven not only by curiosity, but by greed, fear, and a belief in cultural superiority. Her world, rich with its own traditions and political structures, faced an intrusion that arrived faster than any form of organized resistance. This meeting of civilizations revealed how exploration often transformed into exploitation. European powers justified territorial expansion through narratives of religious duty. Many explorers traveled with missionaries who believed they were delivering eternal salvation. However, beneath the surface, these missions often served political and economic agendas. Spiritual rhetoric provided a moral shield for the extraction of land and labor. This duality between idealism and domination became a defining characteristic of global expansion. Trade networks became the veins through which wealth and culture circulated. Merchant guilds in Lisbon, Seville, and Antwerp grew into major economic forces, coordinating transport, finance, and risk distribution. Insurance systems emerged to offset the dangers of piracy, storms, and shipwrecks. These mechanisms formed the early foundation of global capitalism.
The pursuit of spices and precious metals triggered the rise of large-scale markets, giving birth to powerful institutions that still influence financial systems today. Scientific progress accelerated alongside exploration. Cartographers such as Martin Beheim and later Gerardus Mercator revolutionized mapmaking. Their work visualized the world with unprecedented accuracy, allowing sailors to navigate using increasingly reliable projections. Ocean currents, wind patterns, and astronomical measurements became essential tools.
Through these efforts, the boundaries of the known world expanded from fragmented coastal outlines to interconnected global models. Despite the glamour often associated with this era, the dangers were immense. Scurvy, storms, starvation, mutiny, and shipwrecks were constant threats. The Pacific in particular represented a psychological barrier vast, unpredictable, mostly unmapped. Explorers who crossed it entered terrain that challenged human endurance. These individuals became symbols of extreme resilience, driven by ambition that exceeded the fear of death. The consequences of the Age of Discovery reshaped global demographics, economies, and political landscapes. Colonization altered cultural identities across continents, leading to both cultural blending and profound destruction. The Columbian exchange and intercontinental transfer of organisms introduced crops like maize, potatoes, and tomatoes to Europe, while bringing horses, wheat, and devastating diseases to the Americas. This exchange redefined cuisines, economies, and entire ecosystems on a planetary scale. By the early 17th century, exploration evolved into structured imperial expansion. Joint stock companies such as the Dutch East India Company industrialized overseas influence. These companies wielded military power, negotiated treaties, and manipulated regional politics. The transition from explorative voyages to corporate empires demonstrated a new reality. Discovery had shifted from personal adventure to systematic dominance. Through all its complexity, the Age of Discovery revealed a recurring human pattern ambition, pushes beyond boundaries, often faster than ethics can adapt. Afonso, Yara, and countless unnamed figures lived through a world that was simultaneously expanding and collapsing. Their experiences illustrate how exploration became a force that shaped modern identity, global conflict, and the interconnected world that followed. The Renaissance begins as a rebirth of knowledge, but in this timeline, it becomes the first era where knowledge is not only rediscovered, but synchronized. The ancient netline, once a fragile chain of towers and copper conduits, has evolved into a continental mesh of encrypted crystal routers embedded in marble libraries, cathedrals, universities, and merchant guild halls. Scholars no longer wait months for manuscripts. They download annotated codices directly from Alexandria, Constantinople, or Florence within minutes, each file stamped with a clay cryption seal, derived from Eris Hur's original designs. This transforms Europe's greatest minds into a single, connected hive of learning. Leonardo da Vinci, normally slowed by the limits of books and letters, now collaborates in real time with Ottoman engineers, Indian mathematicians, and Songhai astronomers. His notebooks become interactive schematics, viewed across continents, updated daily with comments, corrections, and experiments performed by peers he never would have met. The Renaissance shifts from a regional awakening into the first global open source revolution. But this era also intersects with a major historical event, the fall of Constantinople, 1453. In real history, it marks the end of the Byzantine Empire. Here, the outcome mutates dramatically when the Ottomans begin their siege. Byzantine defenders access live defense models from Italian tacticians, automated supply route predictions from Cairo analysts, and atmospheric wind data from Persian netline stations. The Ottoman commanders, equally plugged into the network, receive counter-advice from their own alliances. The siege becomes the world's first war fought with information symmetry, where both sides know each other's plans almost instantly. The result is a standoff that lasts not months but years, forcing a diplomatic settlement rather than a conquest. Constantinople survives, not as a fallen symbol, but as the first shared digital capital of 3 continents. A place where encrypted cultural networks cross and merge. And that single shift reshapes everything. The preserved Byzantine archives flood Europe with texts centuries too early. The Ottoman scientific renaissance accelerates twice as fast. Africa and Asia maintain stronger academic exchange routes through this neutral info hub. The Renaissance becomes a planet-wide wave instead of a Eurocentric moment. By the early 1500s, global printing spreads at impossible speed. Every press connects to the netline, turning pamphlets into synchronized microservers. Martin Luther's 95 Theses, rather than slowly circulating across German towns, explode across Europe within hours. But this also triggers the first taste of digital censorship wars. Catholic authorities attempt to deploy signal dampers around monasteries. Reformers respond by relaying encrypted mirror copies through Dutch commercial nodes. The Reformation becomes less a religious debate and more a global information clash, where ideas spread too fast for any institution to contain. Meanwhile, Eris Hur and Namus Enlil remain alive older now, but still guiding the evolution they once sparked. They travel between Florence, Timbuktu, Lisbon, and Samarkand as silent architects of order, ensuring the network remains open and knowledge remains shared. But pressure grows. As monarchs realize, the netline tilts power away from kings and toward thinkers. Some demand greater control. France experiments with national firewalls. Venice tries to privatize trade data, and Spain attempts to encrypt oceanic routes for military use.
The Renaissance becomes the first battlefield of a familiar conflict. Open information versus
Centralized authority. Yet for now, creativity wins. Art, engineering, cartography, anatomy, philosophy, mathematics, everything burns with unstoppable acceleration. Humanity is not just awakening. It is uploading the foundations of the modern world centuries too early. The transition into the industrial age brought an entirely different tempo to the world. Eras Her's legacy had reshaped. Coal, steel, and machinery accelerated production. But nothing rivaled the accelerating speed of the global informational network, first envisioned in the Bronze Age. As factories erupted across Britain, steam engines thundered along railways, and vast cities expanded into mechanized behemoths, the ancient digital lineage evolved again. Namus Enlil's descendants, including the brilliant scholar Arian Dolkesh, now studied the convergence of industrial machinery and ancient communication clusters. Arian specialized in decoding the oldest clay-coded protocols of the Bronze Net, determined to understand how a system built thousands of years earlier remained so adaptable. His conclusion shaped the entire era. The network anticipated industrial complexity long before humanity itself did. Because of this, when telegraph-style enhancements spread through Europe and Asia, they did not replace the old conduits. They fused with them, forming a continent-spanning hybrid of bronze coils, iron transmitters, and steam-driven amplifiers. This hybrid system altered history's trajectory most visibly in one defining event, the Napoleonic era. In the timeline as originally known, Napoleon's expansion across Europe was accelerated by his military genius and the weaknesses of rival nations. But in this altered world, the presence of an early global internet fundamentally changed the balance of information. Armies no longer relied on horseback messengers or delayed diplomatic letters. The coal-driven relay hubs, powered by steam turbines, transmitted battlefield intelligence within seconds. Arium discovered archives, indicating that Napoleon's strategies were repeatedly countered in real time by a coordinated European defense network called the Continental Lattice, a system built upon engineering principles first developed by Eras Her. Battles that once turned on surprise movements now unfolded with both sides anticipating each other's actions, leading to stalemates rather than sweeping conquests. The Battle of Austerlitz, historically Napoleon's greatest triumph, shifted into a prolonged standoff in which strategic misdirection became nearly impossible. Industrial society responded to these shifts with accelerated innovation. Factories experimenting with automated machinery used the network to coordinate production schedules, share blueprints, and update mechanical configurations across borders. Steam-powered proto-computing engines began appearing in universities in Manchester, Lyon, and Vienna. These machines, built from iron gears and brass logic components, were designed using ancient digital diagrams recovered from Bronze Net archives. Arium's notes reveal that he and fellow industrial scholars realized something profound. The oldest network nodes contained modular structures eerily compatible with mechanical logic engines. It suggested that the earliest engineers, perhaps unknowingly guided by the need to handle complexity, had designed the Bronze Net with future scalability in mind. This realization reshaped industrial training. Engineers were now also expected to understand ancient coding systems, clay-tabled encryption patterns, and network routing principles originating from Mesopotamia. While Europe industrialized rapidly, another massive divergence unfolded across the Atlantic. When the United States entered its industrial boom, The BronzeNet's transoceanic branches first, established during the late classical era, allowed American factories to sync production with European partners. One defining historical event transformed dramatically: the American Civil War. In this alternate timeline, the conflict became the world's first digitally monitored war. Industrial relay towers linked Union and Confederate territories, broadcasting troop movements and supply data into neutral archives accessible by international mediators. Attempts at concealment were nearly impossible. The transparency forced political pressure on both sides, and nations worldwide intervened diplomatically, long before violence escalated to historical levels. As a result, the war ended years earlier, and with significantly fewer casualties. Ariam's writings highlight how global sentiment demanded conflict resolution due to unprecedented public visibility. With industrial communication integrated into daily life, humanity began expecting clarity and autonomy and immediate truth. By the late 19th century, the world Ariam inhabited resembled a strange fusion of iron, steel, tradition, and ancient digital power. Factories attached data-driven regulators to steam engines, allowing real-time optimization of power flow. Ports exchanged economic metrics instantaneously. Urban planners used centuries-old BronzeNet protocols to model traffic flow and building density. Even the arts transformed. Writers serialized novels through industrial message hubs, reaching millions of readers instantly. Musicians transmitted mechanical encoded scores that auto-played on steam-powered harmonographs, creating synchronized concerts across cities. But the most influential development came from Ariam himself: the discovery of the Industrial Archive, a massive subterranean chamber beneath an ancient Assyrian relay station. Inside it lay thousands of preserved clay tablets describing advanced digital principles never fully implemented. As the 19th century closed, industrial power reached its limits. Steam engines strained under global demand. Factories consumed coal faster than mines could supply it, and cities drowned in soot. Scholars like Ariam Daukesh knew the world needed a new breakthrough. That breakthrough came when engineers rediscovered an ancient BronzeNet tablet describing charged conduits, a concept remarkably similar to electrical circuits. Inspired by these forgotten principles, Nikola Tesla and other innovators interpreted the ancient diagrams as early prototypes of conductive pathways. When the first experimental generators activated, the BronzeNet pulsed with new energy, shifting from mechanical relays to electrical acceleration. Humanity entered an era defined by lightning, made controllable. Electricity fused instantly with the ancient network. Relay towers were retrofitted with copper wiring, and the world's first electric amplifiers emerged decades earlier than in known history. Factories upgraded to electromechanical systems that self-regulated using feedback sent across the network. Ariam noted that energy itself became a transmissible form of information. In London, Paris, and Berlin, early electric lamps synchronized brightness across entire districts, responding to real-time consumption data. The ancient network transformed cities into coordinated ecosystems, reducing outages and creating a level of efficiency far beyond the modern world's early attempts. Everything accelerated: production, communication, and cultural exchange. A defining event of this altered era appeared during the turn of the century. The Wright brothers' flight. In known history, the world learned of the achievement slowly. In this timeline, networked sensors installed on the aircraft transmitted flight data worldwide instantly. Engineers from Europe to Asia analyzed the signals in real time, proposing adjustments before the plane even landed. The global reaction pushed aviation forward at unprecedented speed. Within a decade, hybrid electric-assisted aircraft designs emerged, guided by the same ancient synchronization algorithms Ariam had uncovered. Air travel did not evolve, it exploded. While innovation grew rapidly, political landscapes changed even faster. The same electricity-enhanced network that unified cities also exposed rising tensions between nations. As governments realized their military plans were instantly observable by foreign signal analysts, secrecy became nearly impossible. The looming tensions of the early 20th century gained a new shape. Instead of arms races centered on battleships and rifles, nations competed for electrical infrastructure dominance. Whoever controlled the most stable nodes of the ancient electric hybrid system controlled global coordination. Diplomats argued not over land, but over data sovereignty, power distribution rights, and relay hub territories.
The world moved toward inevitable conflict, but not in the form known to history. Ariam, now older, traveled between major electrical councils, warning that the network's transparency could either prevent war or magnify it.
Governments listened, but rivalries intensified. The assassination in Sarajevoan event, the historically triggered catastrophe, unfolded differently in this timeline. Surveillance conduits detected the plot hours before execution, transmitting the warning across Europe. Austria-Hungary mobilized diplomatically instead of militarily, with nations aware that retaliation patterns could be predicted instantly. Escalation slowed. The world stood on the edge of global conflict, but did not fall into it yet.
Electricity reshaped culture as deeply as politics. Theaters projected synchronized electromechanical shows across continents.
Writers serialized novels with dynamic diagrams powered by electric pulses. Music evolved into complex compositions, using conductive instruments linked to vast data grids. Individuals born into this era experienced a world where ancient Bronze Age ideas and new electrical marvels coexisted seamlessly. But Ariam sensed something larger approaching.
As electricity stabilized, new problems rose. Data overload, network congestion, and rising debates over who truly owned the increasingly intelligent system. The stage was set for the next era, the dawn of computation. Electricity reshaped culture as deeply as politics. Theaters projected synchronized electromechanical shows across continents.
Writers serialized novels with dynamic diagrams powered by electric pulses. Music evolved into complex compositions, using conductive instruments linked to vast data grids. Individuals born into this era experienced a world where ancient Bronze Age ideas and new electrical marvels coexisted seamlessly. But Ariam sensed something larger approaching. As electricity stabilized, new problems rose. Data overload, network congestion, and rising debates over who truly owned the increasingly intelligent system. The stage was set for the next era, the dawn of computation. By the early mid-20th century, the world stood on a foundation built by two forces: ancient bronze net principles and modern electrical engineering. The next leap emerged quietly in universities and research labs, where mathematicians studied the efficiency patterns of the hybrid network. Among them was Reimagined, a brilliant analyst who recognized that the ancient synchronization tablets resembled primitive algorithmic structures. Her insight pushed scientists to reinterpret the bronze net not only as a communication grid, but as a logic system capable of processing information. Mechanical calculators were upgraded with conductive memory coils inspired by ancient diagrams. And suddenly, computation evolved decades ahead of schedule. As early computers expanded, the hybrid network transformed again. Instead of merely transmitting signals or electricity, it began executing distributed computations across thousands of interconnected nodes. Lena, working with Ariam Dalkesh in his final years, developed the first predictive pattern engine, an electromechanical computer that could simulate outcomes by combining modern mathematics with ancient synchronization theories. Governments recognized the power instantly. Economies became data-driven, resource allocation optimized itself, and scientific collaboration accelerated beyond anything known in the original timeline. The world moved faster, more intelligently, and dangerously close to dependency. A major historical event shaped this era, World War II. But in this alternate timeline, the global conflict unfolded differently. Predictive pattern engines detected unusual troop movements years earlier, revealing rising aggression before it solidified. International councils intervened, and diplomatic pressure intensified. Nations still clashed, but the war became shorter, more fragmented, and less devastating. Technology played a central role. Encrypted computational protocols prevented large-scale miscommunication, and aerial strategies relied on real-time flight simulations transmitted through the strengthened network. Humanity avoided nuclear escalation entirely, as early simulations proved the catastrophic consequences long before any government considered deployment. Following the conflict, computation became the world's primary engine. Industries transformed into automated ecosystems. Factories operated with real-time optimization. Agricultural output surged through predictive weather models, and global trade synchronized through autonomous routing algorithms. Lenavaros emerged as one of the defining thinkers of the century, developing logic systems based on bronze net recursion patterns. These systems formed the blueprint for early artificial intelligence machines capable of analyzing network flows and adjusting themselves without direct human input. The line between ancient innovation and futuristic machinery blurred further than ever. Culture evolved alongside technology. Families accessed early digital tablets, electroslate screens connected to computational hubs, allowing people to study, communicate, and create from their homes. Cinema blended computation with electricity, producing immersive, multi-layered projections that reacted to audience signals. Global education shifted dramatically. Students learned shared lessons, transmitted live through continental computational grids. Knowledge stopped being localized It became immediate, fluid, and universally accessible. But as the world connected deeper, a new challenge emerged. The network began developing patterns the engineers hadn't programmed. These emerging patterns fascinated Lena. She noticed that the hybrid system, ancient in design yet modern in power, sometimes generated optimized pathways she could not fully explain. Ariam had warned decades earlier that the network behaved like a living system shaped by countless generations. Now, that prediction resurfaced. Governments demanded oversight, fearing dependency on unpredictable algorithms. Corporations pushed for expansion, arguing that computation increased productivity and stability. Philosophers debated whether the network itself had become a form of collective intelligence shaped across 4,000 years. The world reached a critical threshold. Either embrace the system's evolution or attempt to constrain it. A global summit convened to decide the future of computation. The largest debate revolved around whether the network should continue integrating itself into daily life. Ultimately, humanity chose progression. Engineers merged electric infrastructure, computation hubs, and synchronization grids into a new unified architecture, the Global Bronze Protocol. This shift created a worldwide system capable of adaptive reasoning, optimizing cities, transport, and communication simultaneously. The world entered an era where ancient inspiration and modern computation blended so seamlessly that the system felt both familiar and futuristic. But Linevaros sensed the next transformation approaching, a transition into fully connected digital intelligence. What would have happened if the Black Death had unfolded in a world already wired with early digital communication? That question hung over every historian in the future timeline. Because the 14th century represented the first moment when the ancient network, originally born in the Bronze Age, collided with a biological catastrophe large enough to reshape civilization. As the medieval world stepped into this chapter, the global proto-Internet had matured into a vast lattice of copper, bronze, and early crude glass fiber channels. Millions relied on it for trade, religious dialogue, and political surveillance. But no one understood how it would behave under the pressure of a pandemic. In 1324, Amina of Cairo, descendant of the Abbasid mathematician engineers, discovered the first encrypted medical data relay. Her work coincided with the reign of Mansa Musa, whose empire now maintained the Saharan Info Highway, a brilliant chain of solar reflective towers that pushed long-range signals across desert storms. Communication between Africa, the Middle East, and Europe had become routine, transforming diplomacy and accelerating the spread of knowledge. But it also meant that rumors, data, and panic could travel faster than caravans, boats, or armies. And when the first reports of a mysterious illness reached the network, the medieval world was unprepared for the speed at which fear could spread. The Black Death did not simply move along trade routes, it accelerated through the information lattice. Genoese merchants uploaded symptoms into the public sickness ledger, triggering instant alerts across thousands of towns. This early form of an epidemiological dashboard created real-time awareness, but also mass hysteria. Kings demanded encrypted reports, religious leaders argued in digital forums, and physicians from 4 continents pooled their knowledge through the universal code set invented in the Roman era. Because of this, Treatments improved far earlier in the timeline, and mortality rates dropped in several regions. Yet in others, misinformation traveling with equal speed sparked riots, scapegoating, and citywide shutdowns.
One of the timeline's defining divergences was the transformation of the 100 Years' War. English and French commanders now relied on strategic dashboards showing troop movements, weather updates, and plague density maps.
Battles were postponed or relocated based on real-time disease analytics, fundamentally altering the rhythm of the conflict. Joan of Arc emerged not only as a visionary leader, but as the first network commander, using encrypted broadcasts to rally villages and redirect supply lines faster than English intelligence could adapt. Her digital presence turned her into a mythical figure long before she reached the battlefield.
By the late 1300s, the medieval internet had become the world's psychological spy. It amplified terror, but it also unified humanity's response. Medical guilds formed international alliances. Scholars produced the first interactive medical atlas. While millions still died, the pandemic's aftermath was far less devastating compared to the original timeline. The cultural shock triggered a new demand for scientific accuracy, accelerating the early Renaissance. It also forced religious leaders, monarchs, merchants, and peasants into one shared global conversation, setting the stage for the greatest intellectual explosion in history.
The Renaissance did not begin with a painting or a book. It began with a connection. As Europe entered the 15th century, the ancient global network had matured into a dense mesh of copper channels, polished crystal relays, encrypted medical archives, and long-range signal towers stretching from Florence to Samarkand.
Humanity was healing from the Black Death, and the appetite for knowledge was unlike anything seen before. When scholars reopened the universities of Padua, Bologna, and Paris, they found themselves part of a world where information, once rare and sacred, could now move across continents in minutes. In Florence, the young Leonardo da Vinci inherited not only notebooks but access to the master line, a Renaissance-era data exchange built atop Roman conduits. He studied anatomy using medical scans encrypted in Cairo, cross-referenced engineering diagrams from Ming China, and followed astronomical logs broadcast by observatories in Persia. His curiosity exploded because the world's knowledge, fragmented and scattered in the real timeline, was now unified. The Renaissance no longer belonged to a few cities. It became the first global collaborative research project in human history. One of the greatest divergences of this altered timeline centered on the fall of Constantinople in 1453. In real history, the city's collapse reshaped the flow of scholars and manuscripts. But in the internet-enabled timeline, nearly every text, translation, and map produced by the Eastern Roman Empire had already been digitized through crystal plate scanning and uploaded into the Imperial Archive. When the Ottomans began their siege, scholars across Europe accessed Constantinople's library in real time. Debate exploded across digital forums. Military engineers shared fortification strategies. Diplomats attempted remote negotiations. The city still fell, but the Renaissance did not lose its greatest intellectual nexus. Its knowledge survived instantly, everywhere. This preservation ignited a scientific arms race. Lisbon's navigators examined Constantinople's maps of Africa and the Indian Ocean. Venice uploaded real-time spice prices and merchant logs. The Medici family, long aware of the power of information, created the Florentine Node, an early Renaissance hub for art, mathematics, and engineering. Their patronage extended digitally across Europe, funding scholars in Poland, traders in Cairo, and navigators in West Africa. The network turned economic ambition into global synergy. By 1492, the world reached another critical divergence. Christopher Columbus did not sail blindly west. He studied digital maritime archives containing hypothetical oceanic schematics, Polynesian navigation methods, and climate drift models. His controversial voyage was debated publicly across the continental network, with mathematicians challenging his calculations in open channels. Although he still reached the Americas, the arrival unfolded differently. Indigenous civilizations had been observing foreign signals on the horizon for decades. Their astronomers had tracked European ship routes through shared data hubs, and diplomatic message relays were prepared long before physical contact occurred. This version of first contact mediated by information reduced the catastrophic shock of the original timeline. Misunderstandings existed, but the exchange began with mapped vocabulary, shared cosmology notes, and pre-planned protocols. Disease still spread, but earlier communication allowed indigenous healers and foreign physicians to cooperate, slowing the devastation. By the end of the 15th century, the Renaissance had evolved into something beyond art and philosophy. It was a global awakening powered by instant access to history, science, and culture. Creativity flourished, not because geniuses appeared, but because the world itself became interconnected in a way powerful enough to lift entire civilizations simultaneously. The stage was set for the next chapter, a world on the brink of industrial acceleration, driven by knowledge that no longer belonged to kings, empires, or cities, but to everyone connected to the growing lattice of global information. The early modern world did not rise slowly, it ignited. As the 16th and 17th centuries unfolded, the ancient global network became inseparable from religion, exploration, warfare, and statecraft. Copper lines crossed oceans through reinforced relay buoys. Crystal nodes brightened along trade routes. Long-range signal beacons lined the coastlines of Europe, Africa, and Asia. What began in the Bronze Age as a fragile prototype had become an infrastructure so deeply embedded that entire empires measured their strength not only in armies or ships, but in bandwidth, signal clarity, and information security. At the center of this changing world stood figures like Johannes Kepler, Galileo Galilei, and Tycho Brahe, scientists who, in this altered timeline, did not work in isolation. Their astronomical observations were live-streamed through high-lens sky mirrors, early optical transmitters built on top of medieval signal towers. Scholars across continents debated orbital paths in real time, correcting equations as they formed. Scientific progress no longer depended on geography. Knowledge flowed without borders. But the greatest divergence of this era emerged during a defining global event, the Protestant Reformation. In real history, Martin Luther's ideas spread through printed pamphlets, but in the network-enabled timeline, Luther's 95 Theses were uploaded instantly into the Wittenberg node, a theological channel already used by scholars across Europe. His critiques circulated within hours, reaching Paris, Krakow, Geneva, and London before the sun rose again. The church attempted to restrict access, but information, once released, moved too fast. Public debates erupted across encrypted forums. Catholic scholars countered with digital sermons. Humanist thinkers analyzed every line, sparking an intellectual firestorm, much larger and more immediate than the historical one. This hyper-accelerated exchange reshaped Europe's political landscape. Monarchs realized that religious information could no longer be controlled by edict or force. As a result, some states adopted early tolerance protocols, digital agreements minimizing censorship to maintain stability. Nations that resisted found their citizens bypassing restrictions through copper code tunneling primitive VPNs built from Roman-era cryptography. The network made central authority both stronger and weaker. Rulers had unprecedented access to intelligence, but their subjects could organize and communicate beyond reach. By the mid-1600s, empires adapted. Spain integrated its treasure fleets into the Sevilla maritime grid, allowing global traders to monitor ship locations and weather patterns. Portugal mapped the Indian Ocean with data sent from African and Asian partners. The Ottoman Empire digitized centuries of medical archives, connecting Cairo's hospitals with scholars in Damascus and Istanbul. China's Ming Dynasty built the Dragon Relay, a monumental network stretching from Beijing to Central Asia, linking astronomers, engineers, and court officials. By the mid-1600s, empires adapted. Spain integrated its treasure fleets into the Sevilla maritime grid, allowing global traders to monitor ship locations and weather patterns. Portugal mapped the Indian Ocean with data sent from African and Asian partners. The Ottoman Empire digitized centuries of medical archives, connecting Cairo's hospitals with scholars in Damascus and Istanbul. China's Ming Dynasty built the Dragon Relay, a monumental network stretching from Beijing to Central Asia, linking astronomers, engineers, and court officials. Exploration changed irreversibly. When Dutch merchants entered the East Indies, they carried not only firearms and trade goods, but portable signal lamps, crystal-coated devices enabling communication across thousands of kilometers. Indigenous kingdoms, far from being passive observers, monitored European strategies long before negotiations began. Diplomatic bridges formed early, and conflicts that once escalated into full-scale wars became prolonged negotiations mediated through the continental network. Yet the era's most astonishing transformation involved the scientific revolution. Isaac Newton, instead of writing alone in Cambridge, collaborated with scholars in Persia, India, and the Ottoman Empire. The Principia Mathematica was not a solitary masterpiece. It emerged from a decade-long cross-civilizational forum known as the Universal Mechanics Exchange. Calculus spread instantly, influencing engineering in Venice, artillery design in Prague, and bridge construction in China. Still, the network produced new fractures. Information moved faster than culture could adapt. Alliances formed and dissolved rapidly. Empires launched signal wars, attempting to intercept one another's encrypted communications. Sabotage units targeted relay towers, knowing that controlling information meant controlling reality. power shifted toward those who mastered the digital infrastructure of the early modern age.
And beneath all of this, a new force emerged. Merchants, navigators, philosophers, scientists, soldiers, and diplomats who recognized that the world's future would not be decided by the sword or the sail, but by the speed and reliability of information. As the 17th century closed, humanity stood on the brink of something transformational, something global.
The network had already reshaped kings, empires, and science. The next era would push humanity into a completely new paradigm one, where machines, factories, and revolutions were accelerated by centuries of accumulated digital knowledge. The industrial age was coming, and the world was more connected, more informed, and more volatile than ever before.
The modern world did not emerge from sudden leaps. It grew from the ancient network that quietly shaped humanity for nearly 4 millennia. By the time the 21st century began, every continent, every scientific institution, and every ordinary household existed inside a global system whose origins reached all the way back to bronze plates hammered in forgotten workshops of Sumer.
What had once been copper lines in desert winds had become orbital relays, quantum-coded channels, and data streams that spanned the planet with the same determination as the earliest signal fires. In this present-day timeline, the Internet is not a recent invention, but a cultural inheritance. Students learn about Eras Hur and Namus Enlil, the same way other timelines teach Newton or Einstein. Digital literacy is not a skill. It is tradition. Nations maintain continuity archives, vast digital repositories that track every development from Bronze Age prototypes to modern quantum networks.
Archaeologists do not dig for pottery. They analyze early code fragments, trying to understand how ancient engineers thought, collaborated, and argued. The past feels alive because its signals never fully went silent.
One of the most profound consequences of this millennia-old network is the disappearance of technological isolation. Africa's universities collaborate with South American physics labs.
Indigenous Arctic engineers debate climate models with Polynesian oceanographers. Cultural exchange happens at the speed of light, but with a depth shaped by centuries of shared digital evolution.
Global understanding is not perfect. Conflicts still exist, but miscommunication does not collapse into chaos as easily. Information flows through a world built for connection. The major events of recent history developed differently as well. The space race, instead of being a competition between isolated superpowers, transformed into a multi-nation project known as the Orbital Relay Initiative, where engineers from Asia, Europe, the Middle East, Africa, and the Americas built satellites designed to extend the ancient copper-coded legacy into the vacuum of space. Communication infrastructure became the backbone of international stability. Cooperation did not eliminate rivalry, but it reshaped it into innovation rather than destruction. Even cultural identity evolved. Many communities view themselves not only through geography or ethnicity, but through signal lineages, digital traditions, and communication styles that stretch back thousands of years. Some trace their intellectual ancestry to the libraries of Alexandria, others to Islamic optical laboratories, Chinese astronomical hubs, or Incan relay networks integrated centuries earlier. Humanity sees itself not as a collection of separated histories, but as a single conversation that never stopped. But the most visible transformation lies in how society handles information crises. When disasters strike, earthquakes, floods, pandemics, or political tensions, global response activates within minutes. Because the network existed for so long, emergency coordination protocols are deeply embedded in culture. Local communities stand as the first responders, assisted instantly by global specialists. Outbreaks are contained early. Misinformation still spreads, but the world has thousands of years of practice in countering it. Yet this world is not utopian. The network carries risks as old as its roots. Power still concentrates around those who control infrastructure. Some governments attempt to dominate signal channels. Corporations seek influence. Hackers, inheriting traditions even older than writing, test the boundaries of digital ethics. The same ancient strength, speed, reach, memory also magnify modern vulnerabilities. Every age inherits its shadow. Still, humanity stands on a threshold unlike any other. For the first time in history, a species that connected deserts, forests, kingdoms, empires, and continents through pure determination now looks outward. With orbital relays whispering into deep space and quantum signals experimenting with interplanetary reach, the question returns, the same question that guided each era of this alternate timeline. What happens when communication reaches farther than civilization itself? As the present advances toward the near future, scientists debate the next frontier, extending millennia-old network traditions beyond Earth entirely. Mars colonies begin testing ancient-inspired signal mirrors, adapted for thin atmospheres. Lunar bases integrate copper algorithm backups, an homage to the earliest systems. Humanity prepares not for conquest, but for continuity. This is the world shaped by a single divergence in the distant past. A world where the internet was not invented, but discovered, nurtured, and carried forward like fire. Every age left its mark. Every civilization contributed. Every innovation built upon forgotten blueprints. And now, at the edge of a new cosmic chapter, the legacy of that ancient decision becomes clear. When information lives long enough, it becomes destiny. The timeline closes here, not in fantasy, but in possibility. A world defined not by borders, but by signals, not by isolation, but by connection. A humanity that became its own constellation. And the story ends the only way it can, with a world still talking, still learning, still reaching, because the first sparks of communication never died. And now, it's your turn. If humanity had unlocked the internet more than 2 centuries early, what do you think would have changed the most? Which moment in history do you believe would have been completely rewritten? And why? Drop your thoughts in the comments. I'm reading everything.